Just watching. The city of Chicago, Illinois, was known for its vibrant nightlife, but in the darkest hours of the night, it could take on a completely different character. Sarah, a young woman in her early 20s, worked at a gas station nestled on a quiet street in the outskirts of the city. She had grown accustomed to the strange characters that often visited the station during her third shift hours. One particularly chilly night, Sarah sat behind the service window, her eyes glued to the surveillance monitors. The service window was a necessity during late-night shifts, keeping the store closed to walk-ins while allowing customers to make their purchases through a secure barrier. It was meant to deter unsavory characters, but sometimes it only added to the unsettling atmosphere. It was around 3 a.m. when Sarah noticed a man lingering at one of the gas pumps. He stood there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity, his gaze fixed on the gas station. Sarah couldn't help but feel a shiver crawl up her spine as she watched him on the monitor. 10 long minutes passed, and the man finally made his way to the service window. He was a tall figure, his features obscured by the shadows cast by the dimly lit gas station. Sarah's heart began to race as the man approached, her instincts telling her that something was off about him. He leaned in closer to the service window and spoke, his voice low and unnerving. "Can you let me in?" he asked, his eyes locked onto Sarah's. Sarah, trying to maintain her composure, responded, "I can't let anyone in until 6 a.m. when first shift arrives. It's store policy." The man's gaze didn't waver, and he leaned in even closer, his breath fogging up the glass. "What are you so scared of?" he asked, his voice taking on an eerie tone. "I just need to use the bathroom." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she pointed to the surveillance cameras. "It's not worth my job to let someone in at this hour," she explained, her voice trembling. The man let out a sinister chuckle, sending a shiver down Sarah's spine. "I was just joking," he said, his tone shifting back to normal. He turned away from the service window and walked back to his car, where he stood for another 5 minutes, his gaze fixated on the gas station. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her. The man's behavior had been deeply unsettling, and she couldn't understand why he had been so insistent about coming inside the gas station. What had he meant when he asked, "What are you so scared of?" And why had he stared at the station for so long before approaching? As the minutes dragged on, Sarah continued to watch the man on the surveillance cameras, her heart racing with each passing moment. The eerie encounter had left her with more questions than answers, and she couldn't help but wonder about the true intentions of the man who had been just watching in the dead of night. The night shift continued, and the man eventually got back into his car and drove away. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief as the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon. The gas station, once shrouded in darkness, was now bathed in the soft glow of morning. As her shift came to an end, Sarah couldn't help but feel that she had narrowly avoided a sinister encounter. The memory of the man's unsettling presence would stay with her for a long time, a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkest hours of the night could bring the most unexpected and unsettling experiences. Man staring through the window. The night was pitch black as Jessica settled into her routine at the deserted gas station on the outskirts of Baltimore, Maryland. For nearly 7 years, she had worked the night shift, a solitary existence where the only companions were the flickering fluorescent lights and the occasional hum of passing cars. The station's doors remained locked at all times during her shift, and hardly anyone came by for gas in the dead of night. It was a mundane, albeit lonely, existence that she had grown accustomed to. On this particular night, the air was still, and the silence was punctuated only by the soft tapping of Jessica's fingers on the keyboard as she worked on some homework. The monotonous rhythm of the task helped her pass the time as she waited for the clock to tick closer to dawn. Around 3:30 a.m., the tranquility of the night was abruptly shattered. The sound of a motorized scooter echoed through the empty streets outside. Jessica glanced up from her work, her eyes fixated on the surveillance monitors. The scooter moved steadily along the sidewalk, drawing nearer to the gas station. As the scooter passed by for the first time, Jessica barely registered it as anything out of the ordinary. But when it circled back, heading in the opposite direction, her unease began to grow. The rider's actions were becoming increasingly unsettling. The scooter came to a sudden halt just outside the gas station, and the rider, a man, dismounted. Jessica watched on the monitor, her heart beginning to race. At 21 years old, she was petite and young-looking, and the solitary nature of her job made her feel vulnerable, especially in the dead of night. The man on the scooter jolted suddenly, his head snapping up as if he had suddenly noticed something. His face was as pale as the moon, and his bulging eyes never left the gas station. He mounted his scooter again and slowly, deliberately, rode closer to the service window. Jessica's breath caught in her throat as she watched the man's eerie approach. His face remained unchanged, a blank, vacant stare that sent a chill down her spine. The man reached the locked doors of the gas station, his scooter engine sputtering to a halt. With the gas station's interior illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights, Jessica felt exposed, like a prey animal in the sight of a predator. The man dismounted his scooter once more and began to march purposefully toward the locked doors. His gaze never wavered, and his face betrayed no emotion. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the man draw nearer, his steps echoing in the stillness of the night. He stopped just inches from the glass doors, the blank stare fixed squarely on her. For what felt like an eternity, he stood there, unmoving, unmoved. Then, as if driven by an unseen force, the man reached out and pulled on the locked doors, his movements mechanical and unrelenting. He tugged on the doors repeatedly, as if expecting them to yield to his will. Panic welled up inside Jessica as she watched him, her mind racing for a way to escape the impending nightmare. In a surreal twist, the man's blank stare seemed to transform into a grotesque smile. His eyes bore into Jessica's, and a cold, sinister laugh emanated from his lips. The sound sent shivers coursing through her body, and the man continued to pound on the door with a manic intensity. Unable to bear the terror any longer, Jessica abandoned her post and rushed into the back room, desperate to hide from the relentless stranger outside. Her heart raced, and her breath came in frantic gasps as she huddled in the darkness, listening to the ominous sounds echoing from the front of the gas station. Minutes turned into hours as Jessica waited in terrified silence. Finally, the noises outside ceased, and an eerie calm settled over the gas station once more. She cautiously emerged from her hiding place, her mind still reeling from the encounter. The man on the scooter was gone, leaving behind only the unsettling memory of his blank stare and manic laughter. Jessica couldn't explain his bizarre behavior, and the events of that night would haunt her for a long time to come. The gas station, once a place of solitude, had become a nightmarish stage for a terrifying encounter that defied explanation. And as Jessica gazed out at the empty streets bathed in the soft glow of dawn, she couldn't help but wonder if the man on the scooter had been driven by something far more sinister than mere curiosity. Creepy Mask. The night air in Detroit, Michigan, hung heavy and still as Jenny, a young woman of 23, went about her nightly routine at the gas station in a semi-rough part of town. The station was located in a neighborhood that had seen better days, and the late hours of her shift often brought a sense of unease, especially when she was alone. At precisely 10:00 p.m., she activated the magnetic lock on the station's glass door. The rule was clear. In order to enter the gas station, a customer's face must be visible. It was a safety precaution meant to deter potential troublemakers. As the night pressed on, Jenny found herself engrossed in her work, cutting and wrapping cinnamon rolls behind the counter. The quiet hum of the refrigerators and the distant rumble of traffic were the only sounds that broke the silence. Around 1:00 a.m., as she meticulously wrapped another roll, she noticed a customer approaching the station. The figure was cloaked in darkness, with the hood of their jacket pulled up, obscuring their features. The person walked with a deliberate pace, head down, and hands tucked deep into the pockets of the hoodie. As the stranger reached the glass door, Jenny's heart began to race. The person tugged at the handle, but the magnetic lock held firm. With a sense of dread, Jenny looked up from her task and locked eyes with the intruder. What she saw sent a shiver down her spine. Over the stranger's face was a white cloth, eerily reminiscent of a mask, with 2 crude eye holes cut out and red paint smeared around the edges. The mask obscured the person's identity entirely, revealing only their piercing gaze. The stranger stood motionless, staring at Jenny with an unsettling intensity. Fear gripped Jenny as she fumbled to pick up the phone and dial 911. She kept her eyes fixed on the intruder, who remained unnervingly still. The seconds stretched into minutes as she whispered her urgent plea for help to the dispatcher on the other end of the line. The stranger's silent vigil continued, their eyes locked onto Jenny's, unblinking and unwavering. The atmosphere in the gas station became oppressive, and a sense of impending danger weighed heavily on Jenny's shoulders. Then, without warning, the stranger raised a hand, still clad in the hoodie's pocket, and gave a slow, deliberate wave. The mask remained a grotesque fixture on their face, and the silence hung in the air like a thick fog. Finally, the stranger turned away from the door and began to walk away. Jenny watched, her breath coming in ragged gasps, as the intruder's form retreated into the darkness of the night. She stayed on the line with the police, recounting the chilling encounter and hoping that they would catch up to the masked figure. As the minutes passed, the distant sound of sirens grew closer, and the red and blue lights of a police car bathed the gas station in an eerie glow. Jenny's heart continued to race as she waited for the officers to arrive, unsure if they would catch up to the mysterious intruder or if the night would remain shrouded in uncertainty. The encounter with the person wearing the creepy mask would forever haunt Jenny, a chilling reminder of the unsettling incidents that could occur during the quietest hours of the night. As the police took her statement and combed the area for any signs of the stranger, she couldn't help but wonder about the motivations and intentions of the masked figure who had stared at her for what felt like an eternity before disappearing into the shadows. Don't worry, it's not my blood. In the heart of Los Angeles, California, the city of angels, there was a gas station that operated 24 hours a day. The station was nestled on a dimly lit street in a quiet part of town, but the night shift workers knew that appearances could be deceiving. In a city known for its glamour and dreams, they were accustomed to the darker side of reality. On this particular night, Sarah, a 28-year-old gas station attendant, was manning the counter. She had grown used to the solitary routine that came with her late-night shifts, and the flickering fluorescent lights overhead provided an eerie backdrop to her nightly duties. It was well past midnight when a figure stumbled through the station's glass door. The stranger's clothes were splattered with crimson, and blood covered his hands and face. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she looked up from behind the counter, her eyes widening in shock. The man appeared disheveled, his eyes wide with a wild and vacant look. His face was smeared with blood, and he had a strange, unsettling smile plastered across his lips. He walked with an unsteady gait, leaving bloody footprints in his wake. Despite the horrific sight before her, Sarah quickly composed herself, her instincts kicking in. She had seen her fair share of strange characters over the years, but this was something else entirely. The man approached the counter, his eyes locked onto hers, and he didn't seem the least bit concerned about the blood that covered him. In a voice that was almost too calm for the situation, Sarah greeted him. "Hello, sir. Can I help you with something?" The man's response was chilling. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached for a candy bar and a cup of coffee from the shelves behind the counter. His hands were caked with dried blood, and the blood on his face seemed to have coagulated into a grotesque mask. He placed the items on the counter, and with a dazed expression, he reached into his pocket and pulled out some crumpled bills. Sarah watched in disbelief as the man counted out the exact change for his purchases. His movements were strangely mechanical, as if he were operating on autopilot. He placed the money on the counter and turned his gaze back to Sarah. "Don't worry," he muttered in a low, monotone voice, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's not my blood." Sarah's heart raced as she processed his words. The man's eerie assurance sent a chill down her spine. The implication of his statement hung heavily in the air, leaving her with more questions than answers. Who did the blood belong to? And why was he so eerily calm about it? Without another word, the man picked up his coffee and candy bar and turned to leave. He left the station, the jingling of the bell above the door fading into the distance. As the man disappeared into the night, Sarah was left standing behind the counter, her mind racing. The gas station had seen its fair share of bizarre encounters, but this one had shaken her to the core. The blood-covered stranger, with his cryptic words and vacant eyes, had left an indelible mark on her memory. The hours passed, and the night grew quiet once more. The fluorescent lights continued to flicker overhead, casting long, eerie shadows across the empty aisles. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something inexplicable and deeply unsettling. The gas station, once a place of routine and monotony, had become a haunting memory that would forever be etched in Sarah's mind. The mystery of the blood-covered stranger would remain unsolved, a chilling reminder of the strange and unsettling encounters that could occur in the darkest hours of the night.